I think the first question I have really is what triggered this journey? Was it something that had been latent within you for a long time, or was it something that was triggered immediately by the events that transpired?
Just 2 days ago, I was talking to somebody who's also a writer, a very senior lawyer, policymaker, and he was saying to me that publishers like me are basically the walking dead.
This is the space Namita Devidayal invites us to in her latest book. She turns inward, reflecting on her own journey through doubt, uncertainty, and searching for meaning.
But somehow at this time, it feels like just that kind of book that we all need to read.
Hi, my name is Asad Lalji. I run Avid Learning, and thank you for being here in such great numbers and on time. Life often presents itself as a story we think we understand, only to reveal deeper questions along the way. There are moments in our lives that appear complete on the surface, yet inside we feel a quiet dissonance. This is the space Namita Devidayal invites us to in her latest book. She turns inward, reflecting on her own journey through doubt, uncertainty, and searching for meaning. She blends the personal with the philosophical, decoding the teachings of the Upanishads in a way that feels intimate, approachable, and human. Literature, after all, is about ideas, connections, and conversations it sparks. At Avid Learning, literature is one of our most robust pillars of our curatorial vision. We're committed to introducing both new and established voices to our Mumbai audiences, and over the years we've partnered with literature festivals, publishing houses, authors, academicians, and thought leaders to create programming that is rich in dialogue and meaningful in cultural impact. After the successful launch of the sixth string of Vilayat Khan in 2018, we're delighted to present the Mumbai launch of Namita Devidayal's latest book. This also marks our fourth collaboration, built on stories, whether drawn from music, philosophy, or life. We're also pleased to be back at Great Eastern Home. I think our collaboration began here in 2011 with Himanshu and Anurag, with a series of photography workshops around this gorgeous pond behind you. But to the task at hand, Westland Books, the Great Eastern Homes, and Avid Learning presents the Mumbai launch of Tangerine, How to Read the Upanishads Without Giving Up Coffee. We will commence the proceedings with a thought-provoking conversation between Namita and producer and founder, Roy Kapur Films, Siddharth Roy Kapur. To take the evening forward, please welcome publisher, Westland Books, Karthika, for her opening remarks. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to our friends who are joining us online, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Asad. Just very lovely to be here. So thank you for turning up. I know you all turned up for Namita's old friendships, I think, in many cases. I just want to say that this book is one of the most unusual books you're going to read. It's not a book that could perhaps have been written maybe 10 years ago, wouldn't possibly have been thought of 20 years ago. But somehow at this time, it feels like just that kind of book that we all need to read. Just 2 days ago, I was talking to somebody who's also a writer, a very senior lawyer, policymaker, and he was saying to me that publishers like me are basically the walking dead. He was very confident about it. He said, you guys are dead, you're gone. Like AI is going to take over, nobody's reading books, there's no money to be made in this, there are no readers. And then we spend the next hour talking about what book he should write next and what does the market want. And in some ways, that is the paradox that we are inhabiting. This world where it seems that books are irrelevant, ideas of a certain kind are from another past time, and yet there is nothing that has come to replace not only the book, but the stillness, the quietude, the reflection that this physical object of a book, whether it's physical or on Kindle or whatever, but this time you're spending with these words, what it does to you, this going inward that it can induce, I don't think there's anything that replaces it or can replace it in the foreseeable future. And Tangerine, Namita's Tangerine, is exactly that kind of book that is about stillness, that is about quietude, that is about reflection, about going inward, about finding out things about yourself and the world that perhaps you didn't expect to find even when you set out on this journey. Perhaps you never expected to want to set out on such a journey at all. But what it did for me as one of her editors was to enter space that was quite unfamiliar. Hindu. I was telling her that I'm wearing a bindi today. It's a Hindu conversation, but it's not a Hindutva conversation at all. It's a conversation about the things that we value, that we should value and keep alive. And when Namita and I first spoke about this, I think I was a little uncertain as well. Like, is this the climate into which you want to talk about writing a book about religion, philosophy, Hinduism at all? But I think, yes, it is perhaps an awkward conversation, perhaps a brave conversation, and Namita is nothing if not brave. And I cannot think of a better person to kind of throw this cat among the pigeons and say, very sweetly, it's fine, let's just talk about it. And she will make you think while you read this book and talk about it. So I'm just delighted that we got to publish this book and to work with Namita on this. I'm delighted you're all here, that Mr. Kapur is going to do the conversation with her, and to my colleagues, others who worked to make this book possible and to bring it to you. I just, thank you. And thank you, Namita. Over to you both. A very warm thank you to Asad for this gorgeous, gorgeous event and this organization, this place. We wouldn't have thought of it. I mean, in Delhi, we didn't even know places like this exist. So I'm just very grateful. Thank you, and over to the two of you.
Thank you so much, Asad and Kartika and Siddharth, who I'm going to call Roy, by the way, just because that's how I know him. And I'm really, really happy to be here and happy to be in conversation with Roy because, well, apart from the fact that he's really handsome and really intelligent,
Objectification 101.
I'm very intrigued by the fact that he's not quite a believer, and yet he responded to this book, and that meant a lot to me because I've spent my whole time sort of constantly feeling like, oh my God, like, am I getting too religious? And that constant narrative that was playing out in my head, this just kind of put that at rest, because obviously the book is more universal and, appeals to all kinds of people from all kinds of faiths, and that was my intention, honestly. So thank you all, and thank you, Siddharth.
Thank you, Namita. It's lovely to be here and to celebrate the official launch of the book with you all. I've had the pleasure of reading it twice now, once before it was published, and once now that I knew that I was going to be in conversation with Namita, I thought I had to brush up on it. And each time was a delight. And I think what Namita said is quite accurate about the fact is that I am an avowed atheist, but I still responded to the book. And I suppose it was because the experience that Namita details out is a really human experience. It's really irrelevant whether you have faith or you don't. The experiences that she went through to be able to bring her to where she is now are experiences that I think we all go through, and we probably respond to them in different ways. She responded in this particular way, where she went out on a search and on a journey. Some others look inward, others take to other ways in which to vent in order to be able to process what they're going through. But I think this is the journey that she went on. So I'm going to open up my cheat sheet now in order to be able to cover everything that I'd like to talk to her about. But I think to start with, again, the fact is that believer versus non-believer, but the experience that you went on where you were this head girl, high achiever, Princeton graduate, someone who's pretty much going to be winning at life, as most people would say, and then you came across a situation where you probably felt that this was not something that you'd signed up for, where you felt that, okay, this is not how I thought my world would turn out to be. And you've been pretty open about that in the book as well, and you've been quite, sort of generous in sharing your life with us in that sense. So I think the first question I have really is what triggered this journey? Was it something that had been latent within you for a long time, or was it something that was triggered immediately by the events that transpired?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, you know, on one level, it just sounds like heartbreak drove me to this. But in the funny thing is that I don't think that it was any one particular event or incident. I think that I did reach a point in my life where I wanted something more, and I can't quite put my finger on it. I think that it sort of started with a feeling that all the things that I thought would make me happy, which is the usual things, you know, success and having a great family and, you know, all the various things, money, blah, blah, does the trick. But clearly there was something that was absent that I was yearning for, and maybe I can just read the extract that kind of talks about that. And also, what I want to preface that by saying is that, you know, I think that for some odd reason, we tend to run away from suffering, from the idea of pain or something that, you know, makes us feel sad. And I really actually believe that that is something which, if navigated right, can be the inflection point for something much greater. Because most of us, for most reasons, just do end up living you know, happy-go-lucky life and kind of like do pretty okay. And I think that almost everyone at some point has that inflection point for different reasons. But it's not about what caused that particular thing. It's just something that then forces you to start reflecting on much deeper issues and the meaning of life, etc. So I'm going to read out this bit which talks about that, which the perfect world that I had curated around me was not working the way I had thought it would. For a while, I felt like I was living the anxiety dream where you are endlessly late for an exam. I began to realize that I had to repair something within, not just rely on external circumstances and insidious reward systems. I started doing yoga regularly. I went for therapy. Tentatively, grudgingly, I turned to various self-help practices, all of which I had once smugly thought were not for me. I remember describing my non-garden, my time to a friend who worked on alternative healing modules. He's here right now. He went online and found me an Ayurvedic center overlooking the vast and calming Mulshi Lake, a few hours' drive from Mumbai. It was going to be my Walden Pond. I went there for 2 weeks to detox mind and body, to stare at the water and meditate on falling leaves and do little else. Doing is so often a distraction from being. It was the first time I was giving my brain a short sabbatical from its habitual egocentric excursions, going round and round without getting anywhere new. It was also the first time I was taking a different route, trusting something beyond the rational mind, something that would help me stop feeling low. I did not know then that this lingering thread of sadness would become an inflection point. It sent me looking for answers. My melancholic state had been triggered by an external event, but ended up scratching at the scab of an emptiness within that had perhaps always been there, always looking to be temporarily filled. I could no longer rely on the props that I had so carefully set up around me. One of them had collapsed, and now the whole structure was teetering. The slow burn of gloom helped me realize that my intellect or Ivy League education or wealth or relationships may not always help me control the outcomes of my life. Sorrow, untimely death, the many confounding situations that contradict everything you assume to be true, Nothing I possessed had helped me understand all this. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do even highly successful people feel an emptiness or even a sudden sense of terror? How is it that we all know that death is inevitable, but live our lives as if it will never happen? What are those unseen factors that drive all things, including what some call coincidences and others call miracles? These are questions that people have been asking for millennia. Now, I too wanted some answers.
That's beautiful. So what has the journey been like since then, Namita, from that initial trip to Rishikesh that you made and that really started you off on the journey? And, you said, I mean, the jacket, cover talks about to unself the self. Do you feel that you have managed to do that? And so to start with, what is that? And then do you feel you've gotten there?
So I have to take permission from my teacher, Nima, who's sitting over here, because I know. Well, let me put it this way. I started this journey into the study of the Hindu scriptures about 10 years ago. And the way I would put it is, when you're standing on the beach and the ocean is lapping at your feet and your feet start slowly sinking into the sand without you doing anything, and that happens sort of very seamlessly. I feel like that's the best way that I can describe what has happened to me over the last 10 years. My feet are sinking into the sand. I'm learning something that is very slowly transforming the way I view myself and the world around me. And I'm going to use a metaphor to describe what this teaching in one sort of way encapsulates. I mean, it's so many different things, but Nima always uses this one example, which I love, which is that, just as a wave has a finite form and a finite lifespan and arrives on the beach, but it comes from the ocean and it goes back into the ocean. So what that idea has started doing for me is that it's making me understand that while I love myself and all the things that I represent and, every bit of my identity, mind, body, spirit, etc., I'm very keenly aware that I'm part of something that's much bigger. And it's a little hard to sort of like explain in a setting that's just a quick, elevator answer. But honestly, it's the idea of feeling more and more interconnected with a much wider universe. And that includes like not just human beings, but like sentient, insentient, everything, And this, the way in which we've been taught this is so logical and irrefutable that it just all started making sense, where you learn to pause. You learn to pause when the delivery guy comes and it's raining outside and you say, do you want like a hot cup of tea or something? Or, just learn to understand that even that tree that's outside your window is not just a tree, but it's giving you the oxygen that you need. And so these kinds of like more subtle ways of just approaching life, approaching relationships for sure, because that's the biggest area where you're, for curriculum, like literally, like that's where things go haywire and crazy. And so to be able to sort of navigate that with a little more pause, a little more understanding of all the many variables that are more unseen than seen that go into making people who they are. And so I think those have just, I'm looking at it now from a very sort of selfish cognitive point of view, because I'm really not, I still haven't understood what moksha is and all that, very honestly. And, I think it's just a very sort of slow process. The thing is that this whole knowledge is so audaciously counterintuitive to everything that we have grown up believing, that it does take a while to kind of like, dismantle other ways of thinking, to be able to sort of not just be self-absorbed and selfish. It's a little hard because that's how we've all like been sort of taught to like get ahead in life. And so this has really like magically sort of made me much more self-aware and introduced this idea of what I would call enlightened self-interest, where I'm sort of, I love the self, but I'm also understanding the self is not the limited self that I had imagined it to be. So I don't view things that go wrong in my life as like a persecution from the outside. I start like, I'm able to sort of pause and examine and observe it in a slightly more expansive way. And frankly, it's just made me feel happier and more peaceful. So why on earth would I not continue in this journey, honestly? And that's kind of how I feel.
So you called yourself the arrogant yogini in the as far as the initial period of this whole journey was concerned. So do you want to talk a little bit about how friends and family reacted to this
yes.
change?
They're all
in
here, and
yeah.
honestly, like, okay, so basically when you start learning this knowledge with a good teacher, because there's also a lot of crazies out there who are just like spewing their own stuff, it's so exhilarating because it's almost like you've drunk a magic potion and suddenly you're seeing things differently. And so for a while, honestly, I was just like talking ceaselessly about this. And I think I drove first my family and then a few of my friends really crazy. My colleagues, some of whom are here, started thinking that I turned into some creepy right-winger from hell. Like, it was just really funny, actually. I remember, like, my sister, Gauri, who you know, who runs, like, a luxe restaurant and all, and is in a very different zone. So my other sister kind of gets me because she does a little bit of this stuff and goes off onto the Narmada for walks.
And you're only saying this because Gauri isn't here yet? Or?
But I really remember, like, Gauri once saying to me, like, Fab, have a lovely time and all that, but why can't you be a little more normal? Because, like, it's not the most obvious thing to go and spend your birthday, especially, like, your 50th birthday in an ashram in Rishikesh. But I was just so clear that, firstly, I was having fun over there. And, also it was just, like, so amazingly different to go and, like jump into the freezing cold, which in any case people go to Europe to do and all that, right? So it's like not that far-fetched. But I think the most interesting thing happened with my son, who is now 24. He's a clear physics, a pure physics and maths student. And he was just getting, I could see, really weirded out by, me spouting all this stuff. Partly because he's a rationalist and a science kid, but also because I think the climate was such where when you started talking about Hinduism, he was like, has my mom just turned into like a neocon mom from hell, and what's going on here? And he, of course, indulged me and all that. But and he would have these conversations with my teacher, where it was a very lovely debate where he would sort of question her, and she's just so open that she would answer him and try and present the point of view that made sense. What I did notice over a period of time is that he himself started observing the way I was living, the way I was engaging with certain difficult relationships in our family. And just kind of, I think, by me not talking about it and just being a different person and being more sort of I think, understanding, compassionate, able to understand different people, explain that to him, I think he kind of got it. And so now he's really proud of me, and that feels so good. And then, I've also tried to indoctrinate some of my closest friends into this, saying that, it's going to change your life and you'll work better and have more fun. And some of them have sort of slowly actually joined the classes, as well as they get it. Because in the end, it's really not there's nothing about this that's not okay, let me put it this way. I think that it's basically, when you read a lot of psychology and certain, people who self-help, etc., I think that there are versions of this large whole teaching in that. And here you're going directly to the source. So I have all my editors here, and we've always been told as journalists to go to the source, And that's what I was doing. I went straight to the source. There was no interpretation happening. It was, these scriptures are marvelous. And we can talk about, also how I found that so many people all over the world had done the same thing. And so I was sort of like an onion, just peeling layer after layer of, what was really not relevant in my life to get to this incredible knowledge. And so even the people who've been a little bit cynical about things or in my world, I think have just understood that, she hasn't changed. She ain't wearing some tangerine robes and like embarrassing us. It's just...
So just speaking about that a little bit, I think the saffron versus the tangerine of it all, right? I think you've made
My
it a
favorite
point.
part.
Yeah, I think you've made it a point to say tangerine. So without saying something, you're saying it. And I guess just touching a little bit upon what we've discussed before, which is about probably those who are born Hindu and are Hindus today and are practicing Hindus, but are broad-minded people who believe in a secular country, being a bit embarrassed today to claim their religion, to embrace it, to be proud about it. What were the challenges that you had to grapple with regard to that? Because the milieu that you're from, obviously, you're around people like that all the time, and you were very vociferously embracing something that a lot of them are quite reluctant to claim.
So it actually makes me really, deeply sad that a faith that I absolutely love and have increasingly come to understand, which is just filled with the most universal values. I mean, the essence of this is that all of us, everything is Ishvara and we are all one. So I don't even understand the logic of how it has been used to either self-aggrandize or other people, because I don't see anything that would suggest within the faith, whatever little I've been exposed to it, that has anything to do with Hinduism. And so, the thing is that if you hear of somebody who puts on a saffron attire and puts a tilak on his head and goes and starts screaming at some poor imam and says, say Jai Shri Ram, there's nothing Hindu about that. So I think that we also need to kind of be wary of separating the wheat from the chaff or whatever, and understanding that this is a very, very deep and marvelous body of scriptures and thought that, honestly, firstly, you don't even have to be Hindu to follow it, which I've realized when I started exploring all these other thinkers and scientists and some of my favorite writers. I'd like to read out one passage. So the reason I called it tangerine was because, I find that these words just come into my head whimsically, but they actually have a point. I think firstly, at a purely literary level, tangerine just is such a lovely word which suggests, something joyful and happy and citrusy and yummy. And so, I was like, okay. But I think I was making a point because I feel like saffron has been taken away from the vast majority of Hindus and kind of been associated with a party and one way of thinking. And that does sadden me. And especially because I have this one quote from the Ramcharitmanas, which really means a lot to me. I'm just going to read it out because it sort of sums up what I view as the essence of this gorgeous Hinduism that I now follow. And it is, Par hit saris dharam nahi bhai, par pida sam nahi athamai. There is no greater religion than doing good for others, and there is no worse sin than harming others. That sums it all up, right? And, the other thing is that there have been, while I haven't read or, I'm not familiar with other faiths, I'm told that there are elements of this same idea that kind of flicker into every faith. And so that's the way I view the world. We've all been in very cosmopolitan environments, and, that's how I'll always be. which doesn't mean that you don't go in depth into any one faith. Frankly, if I'd been living in another country and culture, I may have ended up studying the Talmud. I don't know. I was looking for answers. It was logical for me to go back into something that I was already familiar with in bits and pieces. I was lucky to find a good teacher, and so I just dived right in. But it in no way has made me feel in any way superior to any other faith, and I will always maintain that. So it's Tangerine.
So speaking about what you referred to, which is about, Western science, like you said, your son is into physics and math, and what you write about in the book is the fact that there is a discrete element to the way that they view things, so they see things as more binary, probably, in physics or in math. And whereas Hindu spirituality or the Upanishads or the Gita tends to be more about flow, much more like quantum physics is. So can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
So I used to fail in science, so I'm not sure I should comment on whether science is binary or not. But I think, through this journey, and especially while researching this book, because and I have to thank Karthika, my publisher and editor here, because I was really constantly feeling a little apologetic and defensive about, like doing religious studies. And it's probably because of the environment that we live in. And so Karthika kept sort of encouraging me to own it, to really kind of go deeper in and to not be apologetic. And I really am grateful to her for that, because those voices in my head, I'm a journalist, right? So it's like there is an element of cynicism all the time that's like we're kind of indoctrinated with, which is part of what we do as a profession. But what made me really super happy was to find so many like supremely, well-regarded scientists who had sort of like, dipped into this magic cauldron. And I'd like to read out, there's one, I'm sure many of you all are familiar with the Tao of Physics by Fritjof Capra, brilliant scientist. And I'd like to read this out because it's just, it's like about breaking boundaries of culture, the field of study, into something that, takes a much more, I would say, holistic view of whatever it is that you're doing. And I think that more of us are leaning towards that anyway in most areas, right? The more you sort of silo yourself that I am a scientist, or I am a, Guruji of faith, or I am an artist, it doesn't work. So I'm going to read this out because it really moved me, about Fritjof Capra, talking about how he sort of had this epiphany. Capra's epiphany came while he was sitting by the sea, watching the waves and feeling the rhythm of his breath. I suddenly became aware of my whole environment as being engaged in a gigantic cosmic dance. Being a physicist, I knew that the sand, rocks, water, and air around me were made of vibrating molecules and atoms, and that these consisted of particles which interacted with one another by creating and destroying other particles. At that moment, I knew that this was the dance of Shiva. The fragmented view, separating the self from the universe and separating mind, body, and spirit, is what has led to hierarchies and divisions in society, serially propelling economic, political, and ecological crises. It has alienated us from nature and from our fellow human beings. Capra writes that the two major concepts of modern physics, quantum theory and relativity, both nudge us to see the world the way a Hindu, a Buddhist, or a Taoist sees it. Quoting him, "Every molecule in our body was once a part of previous bodies, living or non-living, and will be a part of future bodies," he writes. Quote, "In this sense, our body will not die, but will live on again and again, because life lives on. Moreover, We share not only life's molecules, but also its basic principles of organization with the rest of the living world. Indeed, we belong to the universe, and this experience of belonging can make our lives profoundly meaningful. Connectedness, relationship, and interdependence and interconnectedness are fundamental concepts of ecology. And connectedness, relationships, and belonging are also the essence of spiritual experience. So this was just so beautiful because, you know, the similar concepts I have heard in the poetry of Kabir, for example, not to mention in the Upanishads, where we're always talking about this idea of oneness. In Kabir's poetry, I mean, so often he refers to the idea that, you know, the potter tells, the mud tells the potter that don't try and knead me too long because you're going to become that very mud. So, you know, the idea of control is completely reversed. And in fact, Rutuja, who's going to sing later, is going to be singing this piece of like this kind of convoluted way, which is actually the real way, you know, of understanding what we all are. And I just love, at a very basic poetic level, I love the idea that, you know, I am eventually going to become the mud that becomes the mulch, that nourishes a seed, that becomes a tree, that gives oxygen back to me. I mean, that's just like so, it's so beautiful, and it makes you not want to then hurt your environment. So I think that these are concepts that are so relevant today. I mean, imagine if we were to go and tell the BMC that you're going against Hinduism by destroying the environment. It would be like, oh my God, right? So that's the idea, that there's nothing about this doesn't make sense to me, frankly. I mean, I may not be a ritualistic practitioner of this religion as much as perhaps others are, but the concepts and the essence of it are just marvelous.
You've spoken about a yearning for a certain cultural past, in a sense, right? Do you feel that was sort of, that seed was planted in you really early, with where you had someone coming home to teach you guys about sort of Indian literature and, you know, and poetry, and so your parents made an effort to try to see that your academic education was supplemented with...
And of course, Indian classical music.
And Indian classical music, of course.
Yeah, so, I mean, as you know, I think you went to a very anglicized school as well, and all of us grew up with that kind of a background. So I think, you know, my parents definitely tried to really make us appreciate a lot of very Indian things. In bits and pieces, right? Because it was always ambient. It was always like we'd go off to some lovely little village for a holiday in somewhere in the Himalayas, in the foothills. And, you know, my mom's an artist, and I clearly remember how she would make these paintings about these wayside shrines that would be sort of dotting the landscape, which in a sense is a very, like, it's actually really a personification of what is in our scriptures, because it's the idea of just taking a stone and recognizing that it has value and putting a smear of tangerine on it and then being able to worship it. We talk about shaligrams, which are the stones that come down the rivers. These are all symbolic and amazing. And so this was always there in our life, and of course Masterji used to teach us a little poetry. I had a grand aunt who would read out Kabir to us as we were children. We'd go and watch the Ram Leela in Delhi. I learned Indian classical music. I would watch my music teacher spend like an hour doing like a full puja where she would treat each god as if it was a child and bathe them and then put the little thing. And I was just fascinated. For me, it was like watching, you know, like, wow, that's kind of wild. But I think that it was always just bits and pieces, and I think that, you know, our most sort of external and our biggest imperative is a more Western one. I ended up going to college in the US. And interestingly, after that, I wanted to come back to Dhondutai, my music teacher, which is really weird, but I really think there's always been something in me that's trying to connect back with a cultural self that wasn't being fully completed in the lifestyle that I was in. I can't put my words to it, but I know that like I have friends here who actually make fun of me because I eat with my hands, and they're like, ew, you know, but it's the reality of our lives, you know. I did go to a very sort of westernized high school, etc.
But the way you've put it in the book is Borivali via Princeton.
Yeah. So it is a bit of that. And I think I've just, and you know, I'll tell you, like, even when I used to learn Indian classical music, I remember feeling embarrassed about it because it wasn't cool. Like, most of my friends were either, you know, like chasing rock musicians and in bands and all. That's a very superficial, like, a point. But I think all these things kind of have added up and made me want to own my cultural self, whatever that means, because I really feel like it actually makes you far more confident as a person to kind of, you know, have this collective consciousness of belonging to a very fantastic culture. I feel very happy and blessed that I've been born in India. You know, Rabindranath Tagore said that in an essay that the Greeks and the Romans built great cities, but India was largely a forest civilizations, notwithstanding, of course, the great cities that we've also built, Mohenjo-daro, etc. And he talks about how we were, as a civilization, much more in tune with nature right from the start. And there was always a slight sort of like almost disdain for an over-materialistic urban space. And honestly, I think that that is our superpower in many weird ways. And I really do believe that what I describe as Therav, which is a certain kind of an extraordinary resilience and a sense of faith. And I think it's very hard to say what Therav is, but, you know, interpret it as you will. It comes from this ambient idea, which comes from, you know, this oral tradition, which is all reflected in the arts. So I'm studying the scriptures, but I can clearly see how in Indian classical music, the same ideologies apply. I'll give you one example that's so fabulous, is that the idea of authorship. I mean, how crazy is it that the Upanishads are authorless? That no one person has written this, no one knows who it is. It's kind of like revealed wisdom. Nobody knows who's written a rag. And you know, this idea of, when you talk about unselfing the self, that's what it is, right? It's the idea of not, the hubris of the self is just actually really debilitating. And I'm very, very drawn to the idea of, like, you know, there being a higher author up there rather than like the great author who has written some book called Tangerine or blah, blah, blah. And so these ideas are just something that I'm really, I can't help but being drawn to. And it's not like I'm any less Western or have changed my playlist on Spotify or whatever. You know, it's like it's all there. Everything's the same in my life. But the way I look at it and the way I've explained it to my son as well is that it's like adding layers to yourself. Layers that just make you more whole and more in touch with, you know, yourself. At a philosophical level, at a personal level, at a cultural level, yeah. So the cultural part is something that I'm now owning more and more. I like it.
Yeah, I don't think we should tell anyone in my industry about authorship, because directors will take the authorship away from writers.
Exactly, right? So everyone's like at it. It's one kind of like cacophonous scramble of endless
For credits. I'll end and then I'll hand over to you, because I promised that you could challenge me on my belief system as well. But there's a really interesting, that there are two things actually in the book, which is the rope and the snake, which you keep coming back to, which I think any of us can relate to. Yeah. And it'll be great if you can talk a little bit about the rope and the snake. Okay. And a random text that you got from P that was about don't come in the way of yourself, and which turns out to be the way that you end the book as well, in a sense. So I'd love for you to, you know, elaborate on that.
Okay, I'm going to attempt this with your permission. So this is from the Manduka Upanishad, is it? The rope and the snake is an idea. Maybe I'll just read this out because, I've like obviously written it properly rather than me babbling away and trying to explain it. It's from the Mandukya Upanishad. You see something in the dark. It seems to be a snake, so you jump with terror. But it's a rope. The story has a real part and an unreal part. There is something. That part is real. It is absolute and irrefutable. The snake, however, is unreal, but only relatively so because it does bring on fear and makes you want to run. So when you shine light on this object, the real part, which is there is something, remains unchanged, but the unreal, which is the snake, changes to a rope. Suddenly, the perception, which was the mind's projection, changes. And this is how most of us live, in a state of constant fear of what may not be real. The snake rope paradox is the great mystery of our lives. We cannot say it is there, nor that it is not there. On one level, it is there because we really did jump with terror. On another, it is not there because what made us jump was a mere rope. What we see is therefore not the whole truth. The sky is not blue, and the sun does not really set in the ocean. Our thoughts and senses offer only one dimension of experiencing the world. We superimpose our ideas, often from a confused or cluttered or curdled mind space, turning many ropes into snakes. And when the light shines, we realize that there is no snake. The only absolute truth is, there is. There is. There is. It's befriending the is of what is unfolding. So, I guess the lesson that I drew from this is operate in the world with the knowledge that you are the individual who may see the rope as the snake, but you also should know that it is not real. And that perspective and the pause that it brings about enables the is to unfold in all its divine perfection.
That's beautiful.
So about unselfing the self, I guess it's just...
Actually, the don't get in the way of yourself.
Don't get in the way of yourself is basically a way of saying that the self that you think is the self is only the relative self, and there is an absolute self, which is really hard and abstract, but the more one hears the teachings and the more one reads the literature, you start understanding the idea that you become the mulch that becomes the tree. And so it's actually like enormously liberating because you just don't take yourself that seriously. You may take like micro work that you do or certain aspects of your life seriously while in that role. But you also understand that you're just part of something much more incredible and vast and interconnected. And so it's kind of a no-brainer to just like believe that, because it just makes you feel better and lighter, actually. So I want to ask you how you get by being a non-believer, because now I've got all these great things that I can use as my reference points. How do you do it?
So I think to start with, the concept of belief itself is something that I sort of rail against a little bit, because it presumes that one doesn't believe in anything when one says non-believer. That's not the case. I just don't believe in organized religion, and I don't believe in a higher power, so to speak. And I think some of it has definitely been informed by probably me being exposed to a lot of charlatans in the garb of godmen growing up, and probably feeling like people give their sense of agency to someone else in order to explain away their own life. And fatalism then comes very easily to them, because then they're able to blame whatever's happening to them to a higher power and to a karma from a past life or whatever. And I just think that if there is, the most important belief, I think, is self-belief. And I think if you do have that, and you can control what's within your control and leave what's not in your control and accept that what's not in your control is not in your control, that's really the best you can do and go through life. But what people often do is the things that are not in their control, they ascribe to something else. So I prefer to live my life with that belief, and therefore self-belief, which I will undoubtedly wavers from time to time. And I think we all have to deal with the ebbs and flows in self-belief that we go through. But I think that's just the way that I feel I can get through life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's completely logical. I just think this is such a personal decision, to choose a path or another, or not at all, or, and things can also change along the way, so one doesn't know. Maybe I'll manage to indoctrinate.
I think on a third reading, maybe.
And I think it is unfortunate that there's so many charlatans that are just spewing rubbish, because that also really does turn a lot of people away and make you very kind of like, that's really dodgy. But yeah, I'll read out a passage to end talking about, what this has done for me and why I feel I just trust it to explain my faith. The kaleidoscope moves, same pixels, different picture. It's like discovering music in what you thought was silence. You listen with your eyes and see with your ears. You suddenly pay attention to your breath, to the wind, to the sound of crickets, and to the unstruck note. You roll more into the contemplative mind. I feel like I'm molting, peeling off the pleasant patina, unselfing, that had long been my sheath against myself. I didn't want to be fenced in by any one of my identities. I was all of them, and yet they didn't define me. I took a deep breath and changed my Instagram bio to I am that, although fully aware that it might mystify and baffle many who knew me, maybe even elicit a sneer or two. Well, hello again. Pleased to meet you. Hope you guessed my name. It's like the numbered lenses the optometrist places on your trial glasses that suddenly make you see the letters clearly. These wisdom-tinted lenses have taken me beyond my seeing eyes into understanding the subterranean mysteries of life, that hidden language with which ants communicate with one another, and the not really blue sky spreads across the world. I'm referring to a parable of the ants, which is in the book, which you all will have to buy the book and read. The lenses are also panoramic. They help me see not just the waves that appear in my line of vision. They give me a sense of the ocean that contains all waves, big, small, bad, good, past, present, future. I'm also learning to navigate life differently, blowing like a lighter breeze, flowing like water. I'm immersed in the experience, not thinking about whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. I'm trying to observe without judgment. Neutrality can be an enormous superpower, for it enables you to interact with what is, not what should be or could be, neither forcing nor manipulating an outcome. It has not made me passive. In fact, it has made me more actively engaged as mother, friend, journalist, citizen, but with quiet detachment, knowing that everything is happening exactly as it's meant to, authored by a force well beyond me. My thoughts and actions are increasingly being driven by this new wisdom, though old habits and hobbies keep shadowing me, and I have to gently request them to find other pastures. Slowly, slowly. It's a process, but the journey is becoming the destination. So I think we didn't really want to get into questions, but if anyone has a really pressing one or two, But it shouldn't be a statement, it should be a question. And it should preferably be addressed to Roy. You can ask him what his next movie is all about. Enough Adhyatma. Tell them, Roy.
Actually, the next show I'm doing is about something very worldly. It's about matka. Completely antithetical to whatever we've just been discussing. So,
You'd be surprised.
or the game of life, the chance and all that.
You got it.
Where does the Upanishads in the book come up? You mentioned that.
Oh, so basically, it's just kind of woven in. While I've braided it into bits and pieces as I tell my story. So it's certainly not some scholarly take on the Upanishads, but there's little jhalaks and little sort of like bits of it that have, the ones that have moved me. One of my favorite ones being the one about the two birds on a tree, on the branch of a tree, which is from the Mundaka Upanishad, which is just so powerful because it's about the bird that eats the bittersweet fruit of life. That's one of the birds. And the other bird is observing. And you're actually both those birds. And that to me is just like so marvelous because it really allows you to detach from yourself a little bit. And, you know, for example, if like you start feeling anxious, which happens to all of us, it gives you that toolkit to be able to like step out of yourself. So the unselfing of the self is just this constant.
Sort of like your caption, right? How to read the Upanishads without giving up coffee.
Exactly. By the way, I got that from ChatGPT, disclosure. So it's very funny because sales and marketing wanted something which was more Hindu and Upanishadic in the title. And I was like, oh, that sounds so like whatever, too much. I wanted something irreverent and witty. So just put all those prompts in and lo and behold. But the book, I promise you, is written by me. Yes. My dear friend Bachi.
Hi. Hi. Well,
One of the disbelievers in my life.
Namita and I work together, but this is a question that I've often asked my yoga teacher, that as a journalist, you know, when you have to confront things and the bitter reality as it is, but if you start behaving that, oh, there is a larger reality, how do you get on with your job? How do you question the things that needed to be questioned?
So it's like, let me answer this by saying that even though there's a larger reality, if my son or my child needs food, I'm going to give them the food and do all the things that I'm supposed to do as a mom, right? I'm not going to just like trip out on that larger reality. Similarly, with whatever work you do it properly like a journalist. And so, but I do think that I've noticed something actually, which is that when I write, I'm definitely, I know this, I'm definitely a little bit more, a little less prejudging. I'm able to sort of like be a little more neutral, which I think is sometimes missing in journalism today. And so I feel like this teaching has kind of actually helped me become a better journalist. I really mean that. Like, so I don't think that thinking about the larger reality in any way negates the current reality or the roles you have to play. And this is what the charlatans have done very often, which is said just kind of like, you know, all is bliss and everything is fine and just do what you have to do. And honestly, I'm so grateful because my teacher is somebody who you could literally meet at the table wearing a really sexy dress and sipping wine, but it doesn't mean that she's not a great teacher. So I think this idea of like, you know, spirituality being this kind of like robed individual who is, you know, talking about only bigger stuff is really like a misinterpretation, and it's done a lot of damage. And so I feel bad about that, but I think that a journalist is a journalist where you do what you have to do, or you could be a scientist, but you could still have that perspective and layer which doesn't allow you to get too entangled in the work that you do or the role that you play. This ability to disentangle is a very powerful one. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it's literally like just as you would have to, you know, feed your child, you do your work. And that doesn't take away from the larger reality. And it's important to engage with each of those roles to disprove the charlatans who are just doing their own number on this. Yeah, Revati.
Hi, shall I ask? Please. So, congratulations on the book. Absolutely can't wait to get my hands on a copy and start reading it. You mentioned the Upanishads, and you clarified that you've been drawing on it in a larger context, and it's not really meant to be like a treatise or whatever. But if I do want to, after reading your book, want to read about the Upanishads themselves, is there a version, because there are hundreds of them out there, an idiot-proofed version, as it were, that makes it really simplifies it, whether it's Prashna or Munda, whichever of the Upanishads, is there a simple version that one can read and get the essence without it getting too heavy?
So I don't know, but I will say you could join Nima's classes because she really explains them in a way that is so simple and so applicable to the way we live. And there's also this book that I have found really beautifully written by Eknath Ishwaran. And so I do recommend that as well. And Swami Dayanand Saraswati has also written on all the Upanishads. I think it's a little more dense. This is like a kind of a nice presse version for all of us who have attention deficit. I think we should move on to the music because it's going to be gorgeous. Thank you.
Thank you.